Oh, no, it's not. Oh, I forgot to change the graphic to the right, but the one to the left is right. One to the left is right, and the one to the right is wrong. Wow. Boy, did I blow that one. How many times did I review this PowerPoint and miss
That's
that?
right, wrong.
Tonight is cheese headers and tanks. Oh my. So funny thing about that is I was given a call. Ted and I decided on this topic on Monday because we were trying to get a special guest for this week, which we're still working on for the next episode. And when we have the name, we'll actually be able to tell you who it is. But I get a phone call from my friends at Taco. Dave Haldorf called me and said, "What the hell are you thinking?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Your topic this week." I said, "What about my topic this week?" He said, "It's the same as our topic." I said, well, I didn't know that. I don't get Taco emails that say what your topics are, for God's sake.
Whoa, hold on. It's the same as this topic. Hey, pick the lotto number so I can go play them because you're lucky, man.
It's the same. So I'm going to give you my version because I know John Barba wouldn't do this. So tonight we're going to talk about T's, headers, and tanks. Okay, so does everybody have that? Tonight we're going to be talking about T's, headers, and tanks. So Ted, that was my that was the slide I told you I thought about the other morning when I woke up in
I heard you say in the shower.
I'm sorry, I was answering a question there. I got distracted. What are we doing?
T's, headers, and tanks. Take a look at your screen.
Yeah.
So anyway, I couldn't find a picture of T, Ted, with a Gavi next to it, so I just had to go with that one.
We'll just have to imagine that it has a little touch of agave in it.
Exactly. But in reality, folks, it's not these types of T's, headers, and tanks. It's actually these kinds of T's, headers, and tanks. So tonight we're going to dig a little deeper dive into why and when you'd like to use two closely spaced T's, why you'd want to use a low loss header, or when should you use a buffer tank? Because all of them fit everywhere just at the right time, right? So that's what you have to decide as a installer / designer and system supplier. You got to do it. So poll question number one, if you would, Jason.
I got it. Here we go, brother. Oh, question number one has been launched.
Okay. Are you sure what primary secondary piping is and why you need it? There's the question, right? Are you sure what primary secondary piping is and why do you need it? So you have an answers here of yes, no, or maybe.
Oh, this is the dead silence part where we count 60 seconds in our heads.
This is going to be playing, where Jason plays.
Yeah, I'm looking for Jeopardy. But hey, Steve, you guys should look at the questions. There's one good one there for you. Hold on, let me get Jeopardy.
Instead, we got sounds of silence.
I can sing for you.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I'm here to wonder what Jason's doing again.
Truly is no DJ. All right, here we go. Minute one, let's go. 71 say yes, 6% say no, and 24 are maybe. I'll be damned if that does that's 101%.
I'm sorry, could you say those again, Ted?
All right, 71 say yes, they're sure they know what it is. 6% say no, and 24 say maybe.
Wow, cool. Excellent. So we got a ton of yeses, right?
We got a ton of yeses, but we got 30% basically that, aren't sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Close that poll, would you, Jason?
Yeah, I would close.
While you're trying to find your music, just close the poll, would you, for God's sake? There we go.
I was answering a question. I ain't worried, but you need to convince that other 34% why they need to.
So
that will be task at hand tonight.
So let's take a look now. Tonight we're going to be talking about primary, secondary, and how this all started and where I was introduced to it, and not even know I was introduced to it. So
you read the book.
But the goal of your T's, your low loss headers, and your buffer tanks are to create a primary secondary circulation so that your boiler can have one flow and your system can have another, and the two not intertwined with each other except for when we're transferring the heat out to the system. So now let's look at the way we used to pipe things here. So here's a standard atmospheric boiler, a standard atmospheric expansion tank, a standard scoop that we know had at least 18 inches of pipe before it. We had the pumps on the return. We had the check valves on the supply. And these notably, when I got into this business, were as big as a small VW or a VW bus, actually. We took those huge boilers out and we put in what's considered large boilers today, which would be your standard 4, 5, and 6 section cast iron boiler weighing in at about 800 pounds apiece. And we had a problem because the systems had 3 and 4 inch mains, all the cast iron radiators, and had a ton of radiators and water in it. And that water coming back to the boiler would create the boiler to condense, which you don't want a cast iron boiler to do, because our return water could never get over 130 degrees to allow the boiler to get out of condensing mode. So this is a small problem. So what we did back then, and you guys may know, is we put in a bypass. We simply put in a bypass around the boiler so that a portion of the water could go by the boiler and a portion of the water could go through the boiler, but the boiler could get up to 160 to 180 degrees, get out of condensing mode, and supply that temperature slowly to the system, so the system would heat up slow and come to temperature. So this was the actual early days of primary secondary without using pumps, because with a cast iron boiler you didn't have to maintain any kind of flow rate. Today we have to. But then we did something really weird after that. So then along came radiant heat and outdoor reset and TechMark controls and all that cool shit in the 80s. And we had to come up with primary secondary. So we came up with this for primary secondary. Now you notice here's an atmospheric boiler going up to a primary loop. You have a boiler loop. You have 3 system loops in this picture. You have a primary pump here on the right-hand side. You should have a pump, and I didn't draw it in. I apologize. There should be a pump on that boiler. I apologize for not putting that in. And you have three systems up here. It could be radiators, it could be baseboard, it could be whatever. But in this, we could allow the boiler to run at 180 degrees. We could have the pump come on if it was actually here to actually inject up into the system, right? Pull the water down and bring it back into the system while this primary loop was pumping. Hence the reason that we called this primary secondary, because you had the primary pump and everything else was secondary. Now, you notice that I have a little asterisk here where the 2 closely spaced T's are. And the key with that little asterisk is that those T's need to be no more than 4 pipe diameters apart from the branch piping. Of course, the center of those T's going through has to be the full size of the system so it can take full flow. But these T's need to be 4 pipe diameters apart of the branch piping. And the reason for that is why and how a circulator works. A circulator only works by increasing the pressure on the outlet and decreasing it on the inlet. A circulator doesn't pump, though we call them pumps all the time. It's not a pump, it's a circulator, creating high pressure and low pressure. And high pressure comes around and goes to low pressure. Of course, you know our tank's the point of no pressure change, and most of you know this. And so the water would come up to these 2 T's on the first loop and go, nope, no pressure difference. As long as that pump's not running, saw no pressure difference, so it created no flow. Went on the next one, look at the next 2 T's, pump's not running, not giving it any flow, no pressure drop between those 2 T's. Go to the next 2, yep. Oh, pump came on, now I have a pressure differential. Now we can start getting heat up into that zone, but we get mixed down here and it goes around and gets heated back up with the boiler and comes back. So this is the early days of primary secondary, which is why when you ask, or when I ask you if you have primary secondary and you say yes, and you say, I don't think my primary pump is running, and I ask, is it your boiler pump or your system pump? Because we no longer with condensing boilers use that loop in the middle. And I can't tell you how many times I go out on jobs and I see this loop in, and because I said there was no loop needed, people take that pump out of that primary loop. Well, now how the hell does the water know where to go, boys? This boiler is just going to circulate to the main. This is just going to circulate amongst itself. This is just going to circulate amongst itself. Unless we put a pump here, nothing's moving. So this is not the way to do it with a condensing boiler, because this application was only used to protect the boiler from condensing. See, this would be a cast iron boiler that's a non-condensing boiler, but we want to put this together for a condensing boiler. So with a condensing boiler, it's much easier. We save you a pump, and now we just pump the boiler into 2 closely spaced T's and off to your system. So here's your two closely spaced tees, which I just addressed the distance apart. You can see that I've now added a magnetic filter to the return, a diaphragm tank, a nice fill valve, a microbubble air absorber. I put the circulators on supply because I know that's the best place for them. If you have a question as far as why I placed the pumps here and on the return, yes?
There is a question, and I don't know if you're getting into it, but there's a question from Bob Clark about why does Lars show a ball valve between the two tees? And I know you'll probably cover that, but I just
You'll just have to wait a second, young man. You'll just have to wait a second.
I didn't know if you were getting there.
I'm just saying, hold your horses, that little boy. Hold your horses. So anyway, so here's how primary secondary is done today, where our circulator for the boiler makes the pressure drop and pulls the water in, but the circulators on the system don't affect the boiler flow. I can tell you, if we go back to the prior slide, I put a system in like that at a friend of mine's house, and I wanted to try that 4 pipe diameters. So I started at the Wild McLean 12 inches and got full flow, not full flow, but quite a bit of flow into the cast iron radiators. I then took it down to 8 pipe diameters, 8 inches, and then I took it down to 4. And by the time I got to 4, it finally stopped. I even tried at 12 inches to put gravity traps in, meaning I dropped the pipe down off the main header. I dropped it down 18 inches, went across and came back up, and I still had flow, proving that it was flow, not gravity. So 4 pipe diameters work, which is why we're always talking about 4 pipe diameters. So there's your closely spaced tees that we're always talking about. And you can see now there's no primary pump. There's a boiler pump and there's system pumps. So when we talk about what pumps are whose, please, we want to know if you have primary or secondary, but we want to know what pumps are where. So you talk about valves in between, and here's 3 different kinds of closely spaced tees you can buy. Of course, you can buy this simple Nipco sweat tees, put them in, off you go, nice and cheap and easy, woo, right? So far, so good. Then, of course, down below you have the Webstone with the valve in between, and the reason for the valve in between is so that we can power fill the boiler. We can turn that off and force water through the boiler to purge it and get it out to the system. With us, we put a valve on our low loss header because, well, that way you can use the internal pump to pump the system if you wanted to, if you had less than 5 gallons a minute at 9 feet ahead. But that valve is there so you can purge the system. And on top right-hand corner, you see that I used the closely spaced tees with the valve in the middle. And of course, I put the purge tees on the return, going with the expensive Webstone. So just to give you an idea. Now, when we start talking about flow on closely spaced tees, I've left a little bit out here. And if you notice on all these pictures I've shown, the bottom left doesn't show you any piping, but on the top right-hand, on the right-hand side over here, you can see that there's a distance of straight pipe to either side of this. And people are often asking, how much straight pipe should I have before and after? And I will tell you that personally, I prefer 18 inches of straight pipe before coming back from the system, before the return tee, and at least 9 pipe diameters coming out. So I did a little bit of research here, and Ted and I have often talked on this. And so one of the theories I came up with is on the incoming flow before the first tee, so you don't create flow. And the flow is caused by cavitation. I don't know if you know this. When water comes through an elbow, the same.
Where'd you get that drawing?
Would you let me do my explanation? Why?
That is perfect. That's perfect.
Okay, well, shut the front door, will you? This is courtesy of heatinghelp.com. Read the bottom of your screen, will you?
Of course it's perfect. He wouldn't have put it there if it wasn't.
So let me get back to why we want that distance.
You got some questions you got to answer too.
When a liquid comes through an elbow, and I don't care whether it's air or water, comes through an elbow, whatever comes in goes out. Nothing's left behind, right? Well, the problem is the velocity on the outside is moving much quicker than the velocity on the inside of that turn because it has to keep up, right? Well, when it comes out of the elbow, it's twisting. The two velocities are creating a twisting motion going through. Think of it kind of like a chocolate and vanilla swirl at Mr. Twisty in the summer, right? That's what it looks like for about the first 8-10 inches. So in this picture here, it doesn't use dimensions like 18 inches and 9 inches. It goes back to pipe diameters, where our closely spaced tees need to be 4 pipe diameters apart. So if it's 1-inch tubing, it should be 4 inches apart, center to center. But if the main is 2-inch diameter main, it's got to be 8 pipe diameters away, or 16 inches before you get to the first tee in the direction of flow. And coming out, you need to be a minimum of 4 pipe diameters from that. So this is the ideal way to do it. And I can't tell you how many times I'm in a job where there's an elbow in the one tee and an elbow in the other to go to the system. And what happens there, even if the tees are 4 pipe diameters apart, the system pumps start to help the boiler pump, and now you're no longer hydraulically unlinked. Now the system flow is affecting the boiler flow, and now all of a sudden you get low delta T's, and the boiler thinks that it's revving up too much, so it starts to kick back, and everything starts to fight each other, and you get overheat situations, you get no heat situations, you get low delta T situations, you get all this shit because, not the boiler, but because of the way you piped it. I watch guys who do this, and they turn the circulator up inside the boiler, which is exactly opposite of what you should do when the system pumps are adding to the flow of the boiler. Slow
Let
the
me
pump
ask you
down.
this. Let me ask you this question. I don't want to prove how old you are, but let me ask you this question. How many times have you explained to somebody that they needed 18 inches of linear foot to an air scoop? That you forgot probably how many times.
18 inches.
It all started when I was teaching oil, and I was telling people that they needed to have 18 inches between the elbow and their barometric damper to stop it from flapping.
That's another thing. So this is the absolutely positively right way to do it. And this was in all the drawings. I could probably pull 10 different manuals, and it's in there just like this.
Now, I can tell you the farther, if you had the straight pipe on either side and you space those tees farther apart, the system pumps will be adding to the boiler pump's flow.
Right.
So,
and there's some questions that came in that you may want to address before you go any further.
Yeah, absolutely want the two to be hydraulically separated. That's really what it comes down to.
correct. You want the two separated so the system can have one flow and the boiler can have another flow,
Exactly.
and the two don't affect each other.
The only way that's going to happen is if you follow the rules. Because you're right. If you locate that elbow too close to the tee, there's that turbulence, and this is all about creating no pressure drop, not putting it in an area where there would be a large pressure drop.
Letting the water maintain its own temperature difference and flow.
So ask your question, or I'm moving on, Jason.
But just Tom Donaldson had a question about, taught in Navy school, always put the loop advantages pushing through the loop. And I that's why I wanted you to look at that. I kind of a little lost there, pushing through the loop. Navy Yard boy always pulls my loop. What advantage is it pushing through?
Well, putting the pump on the return instead of on the supply is what I'm getting out of that.
That's what I'm getting out of that same question that Mike had asked. Where do you want to put circa supply or return it? And you guys always want to put it on the supply. Pump away from the expansion.
Pump away from the expansion tank. Yeah.
All the time.
So we talked about how a circulator works by increasing the pressure on the outlet and decreasing on the inlet. But we can't pressurize water, so our expansion tank, is our point of no pressure change. So your system pressure is created right here. So if you're running a 12-pound system, you want 12 pounds of air in this tank on the air side. If you're running a 20-pound system, you want 20 pounds of air in this tank. So off the circulator goes, it increases on the outlet, comes around, still increased, comes around here, gets to here, says, rut-row, it's 20 pounds.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. And it drops in pressure, and now you have a decreased pressure from here to the circulator. Now, I can tell you that every commercial job ever specified has always had the circulators on the return, except for one that I was on, and they screwed up on the drawings, and they admitted it, and they took their 2 base-mounted pumps and had to have them paid in their errors and omissions to the supply, because the system wouldn't work in an 8-story building with the pumps in the basement on the return. It was dropping the pressure so much at the top that it was always getting airbound and not flowing.
No, it's just sucking air up there.
Exactly.
You want to increase the pressure whenever you can, not decrease it.
Did that answer his question?
I texted him. I emailed. I
All right, you're having a tough time talking tonight, Jason. Maybe that Tito's ain't working for you there, pal.
No. I emailed him to make sure that we were asking this because I could not understand his question. I thought like Ted was thinking, he's talking about on the return. But now we got a couple more questions that came in. Why not pull from the expansion tank on the return? And this is from Timothy. Why not pull the expansion tank on the? Why not put the expansion tank on the return? Well, now you might want to talk about that because.
Go ahead. Good, Jason. You're on a roll here, pal.
All right. So now listen. If you put the expansion tank on the return, you need to understand, depending on the location of the three-way valve, you may isolate that expansion tank. So
not
that's
in this
very
application with closely spaced tees, sir. Closely spaced tees, it's always
I know,
open to
but
the whole
I'm
thing.
just saying to him, you know, he's asking the question, why not put it on the return? Just remember, no matter where you put it, the circulator always has to reference to that expansion tank. So don't pump into it because, like they just said, you'll change the pressure. And how many times have you seen?
So the next reason you want to put the expansion tank where the air absorber is on the hot side, because gas cannot hold on to a hot liquid. It dissolves more better and deeper into a cold liquid. So now you're on the hottest side where the air will come out the easiest. You always want to put your expansion tank there because they want it to be the point of no pressure change. And that's where you also want your fill valve. Now, if that's the way it goes. If we want to get deeper into the position of fill valves, expansion tanks,
that's a whole different class.
It's a whole nother class.
Yep.
So,
but it's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suggest Dan Holohan's book on pumping away.
And to answer the question to Bob, yeah, the Tito's is trying to help out my sore throat from talking for a couple days. So yeah, but no, that's a great question, Steve. You know what? There's a topic, guys. We can put that in the next session. Maybe we can do that.
Perfect. You better get working on it.
Let me write it down.
And in 3 days, we'll ask what those questions were, and Jason will totally forget. Oh, by the way, and I forgot to put this slide in, but Ted, remind me at the end to announce that we want people's ideas on future classes.
Yes, that's why.
And the winner will receive a grand prize of something that we haven't come up with yet. And we will have everyone vote on which ones are best, so you don't have to worry about the three clowns that are on your screen to come up with who had the best question. So anyway, here we go.
No, that's a great.
So we'll come back to this. We'll round back to this at the end, right?
Yeah, we're going to make the prize real. This isn't a joke.
I like this.
Maybe it's a beer with wheels when he's delivering your prize. Maybe it's a scotch with Ted when Ted's delivering your prize. Maybe it's, well, whatever, Jason. Okay, good. So anyway, let's look at the advantages of closely spaced tees. So it's inexpensive. It's absolutely inexpensive. It's flexible in design. I can have two closely spaced tees in the ceiling. I can have two closely spaced tees vertically. I can have two closely spaced tees on the bottom. It doesn't matter. Hydronics doesn't matter, top, bottom, or side. The two closely spaced tees can go anywhere as long as they're closely spaced. And you have 8 pipe diameters before it and 4 pipe diameters after it, and 4 pipe diameters in between it, and you're all set.
Now, Frank Dorrance asks, do you need 8 pipe diameters with a hydraulic separator? Now, that's a good question.
That's not closely spaced tees.
Don't, Jason.
Jason?
Yes,
distraction.
That's nice, but you don't have to repeat it.
All right, distraction.
So let's get to the disadvantages of closely spaced.
I'll say that's next class.
They're easy to mess up. You don't put the piping in correctly. It's easy to mess up, and you don't realize that you've screwed up by not having the right pipe distances. You have to add accessories like air scoops and dirt separators and mag separators, boiler magnetic separators. You have to add those. They're not part of it. Things like air elimination, as I said, magnetic separators and dirt collection. And it can lead to boiler short cycling, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Hence the reason I said that, Jason, so you don't bring it up now. Okay, good. So poll question number 2, if you would.
Here we go. Poll question number 2 has been launched. Let me get that Jeopardy music
Okay.
up.
Do you keep the proper distance before and after your closely spaced tees? Right? So you could always do it. Until today, I had no idea about spacing, or if I have room, and we'll take the consequences. All right. 3 choices. Always, until today, I had no idea. And if I have room, we'll take the consequences. Okay, here we go. 45 seconds.
I'm trying to play Jeopardy with you, but it's not.
You never
working.
did find that music, did you, Jason?
Oh, I got it.
There you go.
Oh, please help me, God. Is the minute over yet?
Okay, it's over. Jason? Jason?
All right, who's the lady who does it? My, what's her name?
Yeah, don't even try. So 65% always, 19% said until today. He had no idea about spacing, and 16% if I have room.
Cool. Okay,
Yeah,
and that poll. So
The one confusing thing about the poll is that the 65, there was a question mark after always. Seems like the kind of thing you need to be sure about or not.
well, you could buy a manifold. You could get a manifold.
hey, I was not drinking or just coming back from Foxborough when I made those questions. Okay, so let's not go there.
That's
So,
right.
all right, so we just talked about closely spaced tees, and now I want to talk about low loss headers. Notice the system has really not changed much. But a low loss header gives you so much more flexibility. One, if you get a large low loss header where you have a large diameter, it will add gallonage to the system so you can help to prevent short cycling if you have a microzone. 2, it can give you air elimination. 3, you don't have to have distances before or after it because it's built so that it can go in and out correctly. So now all of a sudden, all you need to do is know that this is vertical and attach your pipes going into it. So there's no distances between elbows. There's none of that, but there is a cost problem, isn't there? So there's your low loss header. And here's some low loss headers I looked up just on the internet scanning. On the left-hand side is the Taco low loss header, which is made out of copper. And I've seen guys make their own with pulled tees out of 3-inch copper and caps and all that stuff. You have the B&G to the right of that, which is actually made by Kalefi. To the right of that is the Kalefi SEP 4, which I'll come back to in a second.
It's the one they don't sell to B&G.
Exactly. And the one to the right of that is a commercial unit that these are very similar to the ones I used to sell when I sold large commercial Viessmann condensing jobs. So the SEP 4, the key with that, and if you look closely at that SEP 4, there's a high quality air vent at the top. On the bottom, there's a magnetic separator. On the below that is a draw off, so you can draw off the dirt. So this is a dirt, magnetic, and air separator, as well as a low loss header for hydronic separation. So this is a very cool thing to have in your arsenal to be able to put in. Of course, there are some difficulties with it, and I don't know why this is coming up now, but I'll do it anyway. Poll question number 4 or 3. I'm sorry, I can't even count tonight.
Here we go. And there's some good questions on it. Maybe we'll take a look when we launch poll questions. Did 2 of them just came in? Here we go.
Okay. Have you ever used a low loss header? Yes, no, or hell no?
Too much money.
Please, Jason.
You said you wanted it. I'm giving it to you.
I love Bill McKay.
See some of the shit he puts in there. No.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. And Bob Clark, of course you can build your own lost header, for God's sake.
Hell yeah, it's cheaper. That's the question I like.
Right.
It's
How we
cheaper.
doing
How
here?
much does how much does 2Gs cost you?
Well, there's that was listed as one of the advantages, that it was a lot less money.
Yes.
All right, there we go. Time's up.
Time's up.
59% say yes, they have used a low loss header. 38%, well, the numbers just changed. Some of the no's became yeses. 61% yes, 37% no, and 3% hell no. Too much money.
What was the
Right.
percentage of hell no, not too much money?
Hell no was 3%.
3%. Good.
Yeah,
I thought you said 30. I'm like, I'm adding this stuff up in my head and I can't go anywhere with
Yeah,
it.
you weren't wrapping your head around that.
No. So let's look at the advantages
But
of low
hey,
loss.
but let's 40% at the end of the day here, if we look at the poll, do not use low loss. I mean, don't use low loss headers, right? So
Yeah.
that's a
Well,
number.
and maybe looking at the advantages, we will, because I know they're more expensive. But when you start looking at something like a SEP 4 that's expensive, and I'm told that Honeywell has a less expensive version of a SEP 4, I'm not sure that's true, but I have to look. I have no idea what Residuo is doing these days. But a low loss header is more money than closely spaced tees. But when you add together the magnetic separator, the microbubble air absorber, and the air eliminator, all of a sudden it's not quite so expensive, right? So
Yeah, but let me ask you this question. As Ted, you as a contractor, Steve, you as a wholesaler and an ex-contractor, what would you rather do? Put a separator in with a magnet and the whole kit and caboodle and not go back for a problem when the freaking boiler is plugged solid, okay? Or have flow issues because it wasn't piped correctly. That's all I'm saying. Hydraulic separation.
well, and to answer your question, Jason, I would
It depends.
put in
To answer
exactly.
your
Thank you.
question, it depends.
So a low loss header must be vertical so the dirt can separate out of it and the air can go up. All low
That's
loss
common
headers
sense.
have an air vent on them. All of them have an air vent. Doesn't mean they're a micro bubble air absorber. It just means they all have an air vent on them that take out air that gets into the low loss header. So it can replace multiple accessories like going with the SEP 4. The air scoop, the dirt separator, the magnetic filter. It can help with short cycling if you build a large one. Yes, you could use something out of giant square tubes and build a low loss header that's somewhere in between a low loss header and tanks that we're going to talk about. You could do that and it could help you with microzoning. The disadvantages of a low loss header, money. It's simply money and design. You got to have a place to put it.
Well, Timothy brings that up. He says, step 4 is over $1,200 here in Canada. I mean, it is expensive, but it is a nice unit. It's a solid.
$1,200. That's only $450 US.
Well, why'd you have to do that? I don't. It's a unit. It's a nice unit.
That's about value. That's about that's a value proposition, though. In other words, if you believe in it and you can articulate why you believe in it, people will buy it.
It's always about confidence, as we went through 2 weeks ago, right?
Yep.
Sell the job and make it right. So
you have to believe. First off, you have to believe that it's the right thing for your job.
Absolutely, without a doubt, Ted. So we talked about too closely spaced tees. We just talked about low loss headers. And now we're going to talk about Russian tanks. No, I'm kidding. Now let's talk about buffer tanks. So here's a buffer tank in the exact same application.
That's smiling again.
Yeah. So here's a buffer tank. You can see I still have the magnetic separator coming in. I left the microbubble air absorber on, though it may not be necessary. And I helped the company many years ago. They didn't think there was a need, but it was funny. They came out with them, and they were only going to come out with them in 40, 80, and 120 gallon sizes because that's the size tanks they had. I said, no. I went 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 120, 100, and 120. I want little 10 and 20 gallon. And they said, why? I said, well, if you do the figures, you can do it. And it was funny. I went to go find the formula on the Vaughn site, and of course, I had to go to my Siegenthaler book because it wasn't there. They have these with electric backup in case your boiler takes a shit. You can actually have a electric storage tank sitting there on top of it, which blew my mind. But anyway, that's what it looks like on the inside. You can see the air vent on the top. True separation. It's going to hold BTU as a mass. The idea behind this is to prevent something like this happening, and let me explain. You can see the buffer tank in the bottom left-hand side. This is a job that Jason took the picture of, but here's a 200,000 BTU boiler that at the time was a 5-to-1 turn-down ratio, so the smallest it would go is 40,000 BTU. So at 40,000 BTU, the smallest zone there was 3,000 BTU. So this boiler, when that one zone that was always calling because it was radiant heat that was undersized, so the circuit, it was always calling for heat, this poor boiler would go boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom. It was a short cycling the boat Jesus. And if you have a boiler that doesn't have a 10,000 volt igniter with a very heavy ignition system, like an NTI with 10,000 volt transformers and heavy igniters, it wouldn't take the short cycling very well. And it's not good on the boiler as a whole to keep banging on and off. So it wears everything out. So here's the buffer tank, but you know, and I mentioned that I was pushing for the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 gallon sizes, and people say, well, why? And so now we have to do the figuring in.
Hey, big guy, before you get into any further, I want to just shout out, and this is a good question. It goes back to the SEP 4. Charles Mason, love the guy. Charles Mason says, listen, I use it when I don't have a lot of room. That's a great point. When you don't have a lot of real estate, that's when you may want to go with the SEP 4. Just throwing that out there. That's a good question. It's a really
good application. Great application. And it goes back to Ted and mine's answer. It depends.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So now let's look at how you size your tanks. I don't know what emails I'm getting, but I'm going to have to find out later. How to figure out what size you get. So this is right out of the Siegenthaler book, page 665, I believe it was, in the 3rd edition. How do you size a buffer tank? And here it is. So it's volume, right? Volume. That's the size of the buffer tank we want to find out. T is the desired amount of time. The small t is the desired amount of time you want the heat source to be on, meaning actually firing. Q heat source is the heat output required of the heat source. Q load is the rate of extraction from the tank in BTUs. By the way, Q heat source and Q load are both in BTU. Delta T, the temperature of the tank when the heat source is turned on to when the heat source is turned off. So we want to find out the volume. We need to know the time that we want it to go on. We need to know the heat source and the BTU output of that heat source. We need to know the load, and we need to know the delta T that we want to run, right? So far, so good. So let's do some problem solving on that 200,000 BTU boiler, right? 200,000 BTU boiler. Volume's what we're solving it for. T for time, I want a minimum of 10-minute runtime on my boiler. Q heat source. That boiler would start up at 80,000 BTU, so I picked that as the starting point, not its minimum modulation, which I'll address here in a minute, but I'll go with the starting point of that 200,000 BTU boiler, which is at 40% or 80,000 BTU. The load of that microzone was 3,000 BTUs, and the delta T, because all of our hydronic systems are sized to a 20-degree delta T, I just use that. Now, that tank could have been sitting there for a day, and it could be a 70 degrees going to 140. It could be 70-degree delta T, which would just give us a longer run time. And that's okay. That's okay. In a modulating boiler, that means the boiler will modulate up out of 80,000 BTU. But let's look at this as a simple equation at this point. So if we take the 80,000 BTU that we have on the boiler at startup, right? 10 minutes was our time. 80,000 BTU was our startup BTU. Less than 3,000 BTU, we're going to divide that by 500 times 20. So far, everybody sees where I got those numbers, I hope. Now let's do some arithmetic. So we got 10 times 77,000 divided by 10,000. And if we do a little bit more arithmetic, that's 770,000 BTUs divided by 10,000. And if you wipe out all the zeros, like Ted and I were taught in 4th grade, that's all you do is you cross out the zeros, you come up with your answer, and we come to find out that that's a 77-gallon tank.
Did
So
they
that's,
really teach you guys that far back that to cross out the zeros?
Unfortunately, yes.
so I watch my grandkids doing this on their arm and shit. I have no idea what they're doing. Anyway, 77 gallons. So 77 gallon, if I base this at the startup BTU, not taking modulation into account, just the startup, I find out I need a 77-gallon tank, and we look at the Vaughan chart, and here we have an 80-gallon tank is the size I would use. Now, I differ with this thought process, and I kind of think that if it was an atmospheric standalone boiler, that it was a solid 80,000 BTU, I could do that. But I also know that at startup, you're at that startup BTU for a very short time. So let's look at this from another viewpoint. Let's now look at it with 20,000 BTU, which is our minimum modulation on a FTVN 200 or 199 is 20,000 BTU. So now let's solve this for 20,000 BTU, not 80,000 BTU. And we'll find that all of a sudden it's 10 times, let me go back here. I apologize for doing that. It's 20,000 less 3,000. The load hasn't changed at all. So we know that's 17,000. We're going to multiply that by 10. We're going to still divide it by 10,000 because 20 times 500 is still 10,000. So now we got 170,000 BTU divided by 10,000, which is now all of a sudden a 17-gallon tank, not an 80-gallon tank. And we find that sitting right here, and we've saved our time. We've saved ourselves time, money for the price of the tank. We're still getting our 10-minute run time, and we're still providing all the heat we need for that microzone without short cycling the boiler. And this is what our job is, folks. We're giving them dirt separation, air separation, hydraulic separation, and buffer all at the same time. And it's a lovely way to do it.
Explain easy.
The important thing there is that the boiler never sees a load on the heating side other than that tank. In other words, it's 100% decoupled from the system from a load point of view.
Yeah.
And that's why you can get those nice long run times in spite of the fact that you might have microzones hanging out there.
It's a large freaking battery. It's a large freaking battery. It just stores.
It's a thermal battery.
It's a battery. It's a huge ass battery that doesn't make that boiler go on and off and cycle on and off and run when it doesn't have to run.
And the Vaughan tanks.
Steve, I can like hug you through the screen right now. This is the top of mine.
Calm yourself.
The Vaughan tanks are foam insulated. I know there's other people. I know there's other manufacturers of tanks out there. I will be honest with you. I'm most familiar with the Vaughan because I've worked with them for so long. I know that other people have them. The picture that from Jason was a whole nother manufacturer. Buy whatever you want, but I have seen very few people who have a 10, 20, and 30. And I found that in doing all of my loads for radiant heat back when I had my supply house, that I really only needed a 10, 20, or 30 in most applications to satisfy that load. If I had a bigger boiler, I might be at a 40, 50, or 80. But on a modulating condensing boiler, I'm finding out that most of my applications need between a 10 and a 40. No reason to have that huge tank. So
love buffer tanks.
So if you would, Jason, while you're typing out how much you love buffer tanks and you're having a secret thing there.
I do buffer tanks.
Well,
are you playing the poll question while you're at it?
Thank you, Ted.
I'm not drunk. I'm just excited he brought up buffer tanks. That made my day. Like he made my whole month.
Well, don't make a mess. Let's get this up on the screen.
All right, here we go. I love buffer tanks.
Okay. Have you ever used a buffer tank? And don't take it the way Jason does. Have you ever used a buffer tank? Okay, you have a choice of no way, yes, maybe now that I know how to size it, and definitely will in the future. All right, no way, yes, now that I know how to size it, or definitely will in the future.
I am so glad you threw that in there. You made my day. But here, but lower boiler then, smaller boiler. And more boilers.
Well, the important thing, I think, is that you're giving that boiler a night. Once there's a demand, and understand the demand will be,
It loves it.
fewer. There will be fewer demands, dramatically fewer demands.
You don't, I mean, you're not
Increases the
cycling.
life expectancy of all the mechanical equipment.
Yep, you're not cycling the fan. You're not.
Right. Because you'll have nice long run times and nice long off times.
It's just a great application.
So we're way over the time limit. Hey, we're dawdling.
Yeah,
All right,
we're
so 3%. Okay, 3%.
Okay, so what's the answer, Ted?
3%, no way. 58%, yes. 18%, maybe now that I know how to size it. And 21% definitely will in the future.
And that's good that, now, like you hit it.
So you were very persuasive, Steve.
You were very, because you did the math.
I was helped by Jason having a wet dream over a buffer tank, I think, but that's besides the point. So advantages,
Takes it away.
advantages of a buffer. We're adding a whole new meaning to the word boiler porn, right?
Let's keep
Anyway.
moving on to another topic here.
Buffer tanks are more expensive, of course. It's going to take up more. They must be floor mounted because they're going to weigh a lot of weight. Replaces a lot of accessories, so it's going to cost you more money. It's going to save you some, just like a low loss header is going to save you some if you get the right one. It replaces, of course, the air scoop, dirt separator, and magnetic filter. It eliminates short cycling. Disadvantages, yeah, that should say buffer tank, not closely spaced tees. Size and space and design. You have to have the size and space to get to it, and you have to have you have to do it. So that bottom line shouldn't say disadvantages of closely spaced tees. It should say disadvantages of a buffer tank. Just reusing my font sizes from a whole nother slide, obviously. So were you going to say something, Jason?
No, I just look at some of the questions. Richard Szymanski says, I use them on chillers. He's 100% right. It's a big application for buffer tanks.
For the same reason, really.
Yep, it's huge. It's the same concept. But
Frank's wondering about magnetic separation on buffer tanks, and I mean it certainly isn't bad, but you have such a large volume, and with virtually no sort of real flow to create turbulence through there, that air is going to rise and shit is going to fall.
But Frank, I agree with you in that respect. Though it is said that way, I would still using a buffer tank, so you don't load it up. So you don't load it up with all that magnetite in the bottom of it, because there's really no way to flush it out. I would put in a magnetic filter before it, so you're not loading that up with all the magnetite in the system, because it will collect there. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't disagree with
collect
that.
There. Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. So
again, the advantage of the buffer tank is you've got a very large bottom volume, and if it can settle in the bottom for a long time.
Yep.
Before it affects the boiler, which is the important thing here.
Bentley Poe also asked a question: is the hydraulic separator and the micro bubbler eliminator, they're all combined? You can either do a separator if it doesn't have a magnet, and then a micro bubbler, on the other side, and you can mix and match, but make sure the magnet or the Y strainer is before the separator.
Okay, so just to sum this up, we look at closely spaced tees. They're inexpensive, flexible in design, but you must add accessories.
How is it piped?
Low loss header, more expensive. They have to be vertical so they can release the air. They can replace, if you buy the right one, multiple accessories like an air scoop, dirt separator, magnetic filter. And they help with short cycling, but they don't eliminate it because there's not that much volume. I've never seen a 10-gallon low loss header, because if I did, it would be called a buffer tank. Okay, good. And then a buffer tank. They're more expensive, of course. They have to be floor mounted. They take up space, but they replace multiple accessories. I agree that I don't necessarily agree with my own writing that they take up a magnetic filter, but it will settle out. But a magnetic filter is still good to get rid of it totally.
Sure.
And it eliminates short cycling. So, gentlemen, that is my argument on buffer tanks, though I use more low loss headers in my life than I have buffer tanks, but I designed buffer tanks for a reason when I was a wholesaler designing systems, designing radiant heat systems nationally.
I've been on a job that you designed.
Oh, yeah.
Radiant system. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And again, we circle back to the magic answer being it depends. I would say I've used all three of these, you know, and sometimes you might use these in combination. For instance, you might have closely spaced T's elsewhere in a buffer tank system, for instance, right? Because all of these are various things that can be employed to design the proper system, and that's why it depends.
Absolutely.
And just to answer one question that just came in, the buffer tank's always on the supply. I don't want to tell you my analogy of a buffer.
Wait. The buffer tank's always on the supply.
The buffer tank is in between the
buffer
boiler
system
and the
is
heating
between
load.
them.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, look at Bertie's question, and maybe I'm.
Let's go back to the piping of a buffer tank here for a second. As
Right,
I
you
fly
need to-
backwards.
Now, having said this, now if you were supplying an indirect tank in this system, you would want to take off before the
Wait,
buffer
hold on.
tank.
I got to open my window bigger. Hold on there.
But the buffer tank is always in between the boiler and the load and the heating load, not the
Boilers on one side, heating load on the other.
On the supply or on the return. Always between the boiler and the connected load. It's the captain between the soldiers and the Godfather. That's what it is. Very simple.
He always has to go back to his analogy of,
Listen,
his
can I
Joe,
say
his
my
Joe
analogy?
Pesci thing, you know? Anyway, so that's the buffer tank. So Bernie, and to Ted's point, so the system is on one side, the boiler's on the other, but if I had an indirect tank that we know is going to be a big load, we don't want to use the buffer tank. We're going to come off here over to the buffer tank, place someplace else here, and put the indirect over here.
Two reasons for that. One is that you get a much more quicker response because you could very likely be resetting that buffer tank, and you want to be hot water from the boiler. The other thing is that out of the heating season, which is at least half the year, in most climates we deal with, you don't want to heat that buffer tank. You want to let the buffer tank go cold, right? Exactly. So you always want to, the domestic water is in that picture, the domestic water is on the left, the heat is on the right.
Thanks for watching the video today. If you'd like to check out more videos, see the link below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for all the future updates. And also check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.